My name is Claire, I'm 29, and I thought I understood family boundaries. Turns out I didn't, not even close. This is the story of how my older sister tried to turn me into her personal bank for a $40,000 wedding, and how I handed the bill right back to her in-laws in front of an entire reception hall. It's about contracts, receipts, and the one thing they didn't count on. I'm not afraid to look someone in the eye and say no. The music was loud that night, and the laughter even louder. I was at a long banquet table in the middle of my sister's wedding reception, pretending to enjoy the pasta while I watched her dance in her big white dress. Then I noticed Ryan's mother walking toward me with an envelope in her hand and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She placed it down in front of me and said, just loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "The venue says you still owe them for the balance." I didn't blink. I just pushed it back across the table and said, calm as a lake, "That's funny, because your family signed the contract. This is your bill." For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then the color drained from her face and her smile disappeared completely. I reached into my bag, pulled out my own neatly labeled envelope, and rested my hand on it. They had no idea that I'd been quietly building my case for 2 months. They didn't know I had every email, every invoice, every piece of paper that proved exactly who owed what. And before the night was over, everyone in that room would know the truth. 2 months earlier, I was sitting at my parents' dining table, a plate of half-eaten lasagna in front of me, when Melissa announced her big news. She and Ryan had found their dream venue. The problem, she said with a dramatic sigh, was that the venue wasn't cheap, and they needed help to make the dream a reality. I thought she was talking to Mom and Dad. Then she turned to me and said it like she was discussing the weather. "Claire, you can handle the venue cost, right? It's only 40,000. You can put it on your credit card until after the wedding." I laughed because I genuinely thought it was a joke. But she didn't laugh back. She just blinked at me like she'd asked for the salt. "Melissa," I said, "I'm not paying 40 grand for your wedding." She frowned like I was being unreasonable. My mom looked down at her plate. My dad cleared his throat, and Ryan said something about how in some cultures, siblings help out. I reminded them we weren't from one of those cultures. The air got heavier after that. Melissa tried to brush it off with a pout and a shrug, but I could feel something shifting. That night, I got a text from her that made my stomach drop. "Don't be like this. You'll get it back in gifts from guests anyway." That was the first sign this wasn't just a casual ask. She'd already decided my answer didn't matter. What I didn't know then was that she was already laying the groundwork to make me pay, whether I agreed or not. A week later, my phone buzzed with an email notification. Subject line, invoice, wedding deposit. I opened it and froze. It was from the event coordinator at a luxury hotel, a $10,000 deposit invoice with my full name in the billing section. My name, my address, my phone number. I hadn't signed anything, hadn't spoken to anyone, hadn't even seen the venue. My first thought was that it had to be a mistake. I called Melissa immediately and demanded to know why my name was on the bill. Her answer? "Oh, I just told them you'd be paying. Don't freak out, it's just the deposit." Just the deposit. Like $10,000 was pocket change. I told her to call them right away and fix it. She laughed. "You're overreacting. It's not like it's legally binding yet." That was the moment I decided to start saving every message, every document, every scrap of evidence. Something told me this was only the beginning. The following days felt like living in a bad sitcom. First the florist called, asking to confirm my payment plan. Then the photographer emailed me about installment options. Then a DJ texted to say he'd received my number from the bride for billing purposes. Each time, I had to explain I wasn't involved financially. Each time, they seemed confused but promised to update their records. The calls stopped for a day or two, and then they started again. The worst was a phone call from Ryan's mother. She was chipper, almost giddy. "So glad you're taking care of the venue," she said. "It's such a relief for our side of the family." Relief. For their side. Like I was some kind of charity fund. I told her she must have been misinformed, because I wasn't paying for anything. She chuckled, actually chuckled, and said, "Melissa told us you agreed. Don't back out now, it's tacky." That word stuck in my brain like a splinter, tacky. Not illegal, not wrong, not unfair, tacky. That's when I realized this wasn't just Melissa's fantasy anymore. Her in-laws had fully bought in, and they were already spending imaginary money from my non-existent wedding budget. And they were getting bolder. From that point, everything became a game of dodging invoices and blocking vendor calls. I started to notice how Melissa's tone had shifted in her texts, less like a sister asking for help and more like a project manager following up on a late payment. One Tuesday afternoon, I got a message that read, "The venue needs the first half soon, just letting you know before they start charging late fees." There was no question mark, no please, just an assumption that I'd step in to save the day. When I didn't respond, the pressure shifted to my parents. My dad called me that night, his voice careful, like he was trying not to step on a landmine. "Your sister's been looking at venues," he said. "She thinks you might change your mind if you see how nice they are." I told him I wasn't coming to any tours because I wasn't paying for anything, and the line went quiet for a beat before he sighed and said, "All right." But a few hours later, I got another email, this time from a different luxury venue, this one with a complimentary quote listing me as the billing contact. It was clear they were trying to trap me into looking like I'd agreed. And the audacity was staggering. I pictured Melissa, sitting at her laptop, typing my details into form after form, thinking she was being clever. I deleted the email and started drafting a generic response I could send to any vendor. "I am not a financial party to this wedding. Remove my information from your records immediately." I kept it short, professional, and easy to forward. By the end of that week, I'd sent it to 7 different businesses. The more I pushed back, the more obvious it became that this wasn't just about money. Melissa had this way of twisting reality, making it sound like I'd promised things I never even considered. Gaslighting at its finest. She'd tell her parents I'd initially said yes, but was getting cold feet, and then tell vendors I was handling the venue, but wanted them to invoice me directly. It was like she was building 2 different stories, one for the family, one for the wedding industry, and neither of them had any truth in it. Then came the overreach that solidified my resolve. I was at work on my lunch break when I got a voicemail from the venue's accounting department. The woman sounded polite but firm, saying there was a balance due and they needed to confirm payment arrangements before the end of the month. I called back immediately to explain I wasn't involved, and that's when she said, "Well, your name is listed right here on the signed agreement." My heart dropped. I asked her to send me a scanned copy of the signature page. She did. And there it was, my name typed in the responsible party field, followed by a scrawled signature that looked vaguely like mine if you squinted, and had never seen my handwriting before. It was a forgery. Not a bad one, but enough to make my stomach knot. Melissa had crossed a line. This wasn't just her giving my name to people. This was her faking my agreement entirely. I knew I had to confront her directly, but I also knew that if I went in unprepared, she'd spin it into another misunderstanding. So I set up a meeting under the guise of wanting to talk things through. We met at a coffee shop near her apartment, and I came armed with a printed copy of the forged signature page. I slid it across the table. "This is illegal," I said. "If my name shows up on one more contract, I'm taking legal action." She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She just smirked and said, "Good luck. You never actually sue family." The smugness in her voice was almost worse than the forgery itself. In that moment, I realized something important. She thought she had me cornered because she was betting on my silence. She thought I cared too much about family reputation to make noise. What she didn't know is that I had already started building my case. And the more she doubled down, the more airtight it became. The second I walked out of that coffee shop, I pulled out my phone and created a folder labeled Wedding Fraud Evidence. Every screenshot, every invoice, every suspicious email went straight in there. I saved voicemails, downloaded PDF copies of every vendor correspondence, and backed it all up on an external drive. I even printed a hard copy set because I knew that in situations like this, paper carries weight. If Melissa thought I was bluffing, she was going to learn just how serious I could be. My first move was to protect myself legally. That meant pulling all 3 of my credit reports and scanning for any suspicious activity. Nothing had popped up yet, but I didn't trust that it wouldn't, so I placed a fraud alert with every bureau. That way, Any attempt to open an account in my name would have to be personally verified by me. I wasn't going to give her or anyone in her circle a backdoor into my finances. Next, I dug into the venue situation. I contacted them under the guise of clarifying my role and asked for a blank copy of their client contract. That's when I found the golden clause, a section that stated in plain English that only the signing parties were financially responsible for all charges, and no third party could be held liable unless they signed in person. I highlighted it, made 3 copies, and tucked them into my evidence folder. It was the kind of small print people like Melissa never bother to read, but it was going to be my shield. Then I started working the vendors. I sent each one a formal email stating I was not financially involved, instructing them to remove my information from their records, and warning them that any further attempts to bill me would be treated as fraud and reported. Most of them replied politely and confirmed they'd updated their files. The florist even admitted that the bride had provided my details and that they would be contacting her directly instead. Every one of those replies went into the folder. I also booked a consultation with a lawyer. I didn't necessarily plan to sue, but I wanted my options laid out. He was thorough, explaining how misrepresentation, forgery, and fraudulent billing could be addressed if necessary. His advice was simple: document everything, issue a clear written warning, and if it happened again, escalate immediately. And don't warn them twice, he said. Once is enough, after that you act. So I drafted the email. I kept it professional but made sure it couldn't be mistaken for anything other than a final notice. I stated 3 things: that I would not be paying for any part of the wedding, that any contract or invoice listing my name was fraudulent, and that further misrepresentation of my financial involvement would be documented and forwarded to my legal counsel. I CC'd my parents and Ryan's parents so there was no plausible deniability. The silence after that was almost eerie. For 2 weeks, there were no vendor calls, no passive-aggressive texts, no surprise invoices. I started to think maybe the warning had worked, until a thick envelope landed in my mailbox one Friday afternoon. Inside was a final payment request from the venue, listing me again as the responsible party. My hands actually trembled as I flipped to the last page, and there it was, the same forged signature, bold as day. That was it. That was the moment the clock started ticking. Melissa had ignored the warning. She'd ignored the fact that her little stunt was now in writing multiple times, across multiple documents. She had no idea that by doing this, she'd given me everything I needed to dismantle her scheme in front of everyone she'd been lying to. And I knew exactly where and when I was going to do it. The wedding day itself was going to be my stage. Not because I wanted to ruin it, but because I wanted the truth to land where it couldn't be quietly buried in family group chats. And the best part? I already had my ace card printed, tabbed, and ready to slide across a table at the exact right moment. When the wedding day arrived, I treated it like any other formal event. I got dressed, did my hair, and put on a polite smile. But inside my bag, tucked neatly between my wallet and my phone, was a thick manila envelope with every receipt, contract copy, and email chain I'd collected. I wasn't there to start a fight, but I wasn't there to let lies stand either. My plan was simple: wait until the right moment, then let the truth speak for itself. The ceremony went off without a hitch. Melissa floated down the aisle in her designer gown, Ryan looked proud, and the guests all sighed and smiled. At the reception, the music was upbeat, glasses clinked, and the scent of roasted chicken and champagne filled the air. I sat at my assigned table, nodding along to small talk, keeping my eyes on the crowd. That's when I saw Ryan's mother making her way toward me, envelope in hand, her expression a little too self-assured. She set it down in front of me and said, "The venue says you still owe them for the balance." Her tone wasn't a question, it was a statement. I didn't even blink. I slid it back to her, my voice calm and level. "That's funny because your family signed the contract. This is your bill." Then I reached into my bag and pulled out my own manila envelope. I opened it just enough for her to see the stack of documents inside, then pulled out the venue contract with Melissa and Ryan's signatures in bold ink. I'd highlighted the clause stating that only the signers were financially responsible for all charges. Her face lost all color. Melissa must have noticed the shift because she hurried over, her heels clicking on the polished floor. She glanced from her mother-in-law to me, eyes narrowing. "What's going on?" she demanded. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "We're clearing up a misunderstanding." I laid out the printed email trail from vendors confirming I'd told them I wasn't paying, plus the cease and desist email I'd sent to her, Ryan, and both sets of parents. Each page landed on the table like a gavel strike. The music dimmed slightly as guests started to notice. Heads turned. A few people leaned in, curious. Ryan appeared next, irritation etched on his face. "Why are you making a scene?" he asked. I smiled. "I'm not making a scene. I'm protecting myself. In front of witnesses." Melissa's mouth opened and closed like she was searching for an excuse, but nothing came out. She reached for the papers, but I pulled them back. "These are mine. You'll need your own copies when the venue calls you tomorrow." The moment hung in the air for a beat too long, the awkwardness heavy enough to touch. Then I slid the entire stack back into my envelope, stood up, and walked away from the table. I'd said what I came to say, and there was nothing left for them to twist. The next day, the fallout began. Ryan's parents had to cover the remaining venue balance immediately to keep the post-wedding brunch from being cancelled. Several vendors demanded payment in full before releasing any of their products. No flowers, no photos, no video until the bills were settled. Family chatter turned icy. The aunts and cousins who once doted on Melissa were now asking pointed questions about financial planning and honesty. Ryan was furious, not at me, but at Melissa for blindsiding him with the mess. Their honeymoon was postponed for budget reasons. In the weeks that followed, I went no contact with Melissa. My parents tried to mediate, urging me to be the bigger person, but I told them plainly, "There's nothing to mediate." She lied. She forged my name. And she thought I'd roll over. She hasn't apologized, and I doubt she ever will. But I've made my peace with that, because I learned something critical. Boundaries are only as strong as your willingness to enforce them. 3 months later, my mom mentioned that Melissa and Ryan had finally paid off the wedding debt. They're still married, but Ryan's parents keep their distance from me, which, honestly, feels like a perk. And one day, I got a short email from the venue manager that read, "Thank you for clarifying your position before the event. We wish more people handled these matters as professionally as you did." That was my closure. I didn't need an apology from Melissa. The truth, documented and undeniable, was enough. In the weeks after the wedding, life settled into a new kind of quiet. There were fewer family calls, fewer group chat messages, and a noticeable absence of my name in any discussion that involved money. I knew Melissa was still spinning her version of events to anyone who would listen, but the beauty of having every scrap of proof was that I didn't need to defend myself anymore. Anyone who genuinely wanted to know the truth could be shown the evidence in under 5 minutes. And that kind of certainty, that calm assurance, was worth more than any dramatic confrontation could ever be. Privately, I replayed the moments that had led to the reveal. The smirk in that coffee shop when she said I'd never sue family. The forged signature on the contract. The smug assumption that I'd be too polite to stand my ground. I realized that the real satisfaction wasn't just in clearing my name, it was in proving to myself that I was capable of defending my boundaries no matter who was pushing against them. Document. Don't yell. That became my quiet mantra. Friends started asking me about the story in that curious, careful way people do when they're fishing for gossip, but don't want to seem nosy. Some admitted they'd been in similar situations, not always weddings, but times when a relative or friend assumed their generosity was unlimited. A cousin told me she'd once co-signed a loan for a sibling and ended up paying the whole thing when they defaulted. "I wish I'd done what you did," she said. "I wish I'd said no." Hearing that made me realize the ripple effect of moments like this. Every time someone refuses to be exploited, it makes it a little harder for that pattern to repeat in the family. Even my parents, who had initially been uncomfortable with how public the reception moment was, eventually admitted they were relieved it was over. My dad said, "I didn't want to get in the middle, but I'm glad you handled it the way you did." It wasn't an apology for the pressure they'd put on me early on, but it was an acknowledgement that boundaries are necessary, even in families that pride themselves on being close. The months rolled on, and by the time spring arrived, Melissa and I had settled into an unspoken détente. We saw each other at one family barbecue, exchanged stiff hellos, and kept our distance. And you know what? That was fine. We didn't need to fix it right now. Some relationships can only survive at arm's length, and forcing them closer just makes them snap. The entire experience became a sort of private case study for me in how entitlement works. It rarely starts with outright demands, it starts with small, innocent asks, dressed up as tradition or generosity or family loyalty. Then it escalates. And if you don't put up a wall early, you'll wake up one day staring at a bill you never agreed to pay. That's why my advice to anyone listening is simple: learn to say no, and learn to back that no up with facts. Feelings will be hurt, sure, but feelings heal. Debt doesn't.